Have you ever walked away from a simple conversation, only to spend the next 3 hours replaying it in your head like an overthinking detective solving a crime that never happened? It's wild. Your brain becomes a mental time machine, dragging you back to every word, every pause, every awkward laugh, and suddenly you're trapped in a full-blown replay loop. And the worst part? You know it's happening, you know you cannot stop overthinking, but the mind keeps whispering, wait, what if they misunderstood you? What if you sounded weird? Most people think this habit comes from being too sensitive or too anxious, but that's not the whole truth. Actually, the mind replays conversations for reasons far deeper, reasons tied to rumination, intrusive thoughts, perfectionism psychology, and even subtle trauma responses that create amygdala overactivation. If you've ever asked yourself, why do I replay conversations? You're about to discover answers that go way beyond cliches. Because the real cause isn't weakness, it's wiring. And once you understand that wiring, you can finally break the overthinking cycle that has kept you stuck in your head for years. And here's the counterintuitive part. Replaying conversations is not your enemy. It's a signal, a clue from your mind pointing directly to the deeper anxiety overthinking patterns, cognitive distortions, and inner critic psychology driving your mental replay cycle. Once you know how to read those signals, you gain the power to regulate your emotions, silence the negative self-talk, stop rumination, and finally build the psychological self-awareness that helps you let go of the past instead of reliving it. By the end of this video, you'll know exactly how to stop replaying conversations and why your brain has been doing it all along. Why the brain replays conversations, the hidden psychological mechanisms. Most people don't realize that replaying conversations isn't a random glitch. It's the brain's attempt to make sense of uncertainty. When someone gets stuck overthinking or trapped in a replay loop, the mind is basically scanning past events like a mental time machine, trying to fix whatever felt uncomfortable. This is why intrusive thoughts show up hours later when they're brushing their teeth or lying in bed. Their brain thinks it's protecting them from danger, even when the danger is just a comment they made at lunch. And once the amygdala overactivation kicks in, the mind treats social anxiety conversations like real threats. From a psychological standpoint, rumination is the brain's way of rehearsing for future outcomes it fears. For example, someone might replaying arguments with a coworker because their inner critic psychology insists they should have said something smarter, calmer, or more perfect. That perfectionism psychology fuels a mental replay cycle where they overanalyze conversations as if the right version of the past could magically fix the present. But the trouble is, the brain can't tell the difference between a memory and a threat. It reacts the same way every time the scene is replayed. This is how cognitive distortions become overthinking habits without people even noticing. Take a simple example. Imagine someone messaging a friend and not getting a reply for a few hours. Suddenly their mind starts what-if thinking. What if I sounded rude? What if they're upset? And then the mind replaying past events kicks in to search for proof. This creates decision paralysis because they feel unsure whether to follow up, apologize, or do nothing. Overthinking psychology tricks them into believing they must solve the moment by rewinding the past. Yet behind all of this is something deeper, something that explains why the brain keeps looping these moments in the first place. A reason that becomes clearer when we examine how the mind confuses emotional discomfort with actual danger. How overthinking turns into a habit, the mental loops that keep you stuck. Overthinking often sneaks into your life quietly. At first, you replay one uncomfortable conversation, thinking it'll help you understand what went wrong. But the more you do it, the more your brain starts treating this replay loop like a routine, almost like it's wiring you to stay safe by reviewing the past. That's why sometimes you catch yourself stuck in your head even though you know the spiral doesn't make sense. And honestly, this is usually the kind of moment where you think, wow, more people should know this, the same way you casually save or share things you don't want to lose later. Cognitive distortions make this loop even stronger. You might catch yourself jumping to conclusions, assuming someone thinks you're odd, or personalizing neutral moments as if everything somehow reflects on you. These thoughts fuel negative self-talk until intrusive thoughts feel louder than reality. One simple habit that helps is labeling the distortion. Okay, this is catastrophizing. This is mind reading. Even jotting this down in a notes app or recording a quick voice memo can make the pattern lose some of its power. Another big driver of rumination is emotional avoidance. Instead of sitting with discomfort or uncertainty, your mind tries to gain control by overanalyzing conversations, believing that replaying every detail will protect you. But real control shows up when you regulate your body. Deep breaths, grounding exercises, or quick mindfulness check-ins that signal safety to your nervous system. When your body feels safe, the mental time machine stops running at full speed. And that shift opens a bigger question, one that explains why certain conversations trigger you far more than others. How to break the mental replay cycle and free yourself from overthinking. Breaking the mental replay cycle starts with teaching your brain a new pattern, one that doesn't depend on overanalyzing conversations to feel safe. When you notice yourself replaying arguments or slipping into what-if thinking, try interrupting the loop with a simple phrase like, "I'm safe right now." It feels small, but it cuts through amygdala overactivation and helps your nervous system calm down. Pair this with grounding techniques, like noticing 5 things around you or placing your hand on your chest, and your brain stops interpreting social anxiety conversations as threats. Over time, this reduces rumination and the urge to revisit the past. Another powerful practice is mindfulness for overthinking, especially when your mind wants to drift into the mental time machine. You can try a 1-minute breathing exercise, or even a short walk where you focus only on your steps. These moments help you train psychological self-awareness and emotional regulation so you don't get stuck in overthinking habits. For example, instead of replaying conversations all night, you might anchor yourself by asking, "What emotion am I avoiding right now?" That tiny question can shift the entire internal dialogue and silence negative self-talk before it spirals. And then comes the deeper layer, learning to let go of the past without pretending it never happened. Sometimes replaying conversations is a trauma response overthinking pattern your brain built years ago. When you gently challenge this pattern by choosing presence over analysis, you break the replay loop. You start noticing the difference between cognitive distortions and reality, and your inner critic psychology becomes quieter. You begin making decisions from clarity, not paralysis. Now that you understand why your brain keeps replaying conversations and how to stop feeding that loop, the real question is, what will you do with this awareness? Will you keep letting old moments drain your energy, or are you ready to step out of the mental time machine and finally live in the present? Imagine how much lighter your days could feel if overthinking wasn't running the show. And imagine how different your relationships could be if you stopped assuming the worst and started trusting your own voice. So let me ask you, what's the first replay you're ready to release? Which overthinking habit are you willing to challenge today? And what would your life look like if you stopped letting intrusive thoughts dictate your mood? You've already taken the first step just by understanding the psychology behind these patterns. Now it's about choosing to act on that knowledge. And hey, if this video helped you see yourself more clearly, don't keep that clarity to yourself. You might want to save it, share it with someone who needs it, or even subscribe so you don't miss the next deep dive into understanding your mind. After all, every small insight is a chance to build a life that feels lighter, calmer, and more your own.